Let's go ahead and move on to who we picked, our power rankings, who we
Yes.
picked as winners and losers from this debate. I'll tell you how I was thinking about this very specifically is not necessarily who had the best performances last night, but who is going to do themselves the most favors in the polls.
Smart.
Like, who's actually going to get a bump from this?
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. The first one is going to be no surprise. Vivek Ramaswamy, I think, was the big winner of the night. He, got a lot of speaking time, second only to Mike Pence. He had, the biggest thing is like putting aside whether you're with him on Ukraine, against him on Ukraine, or whatever. He had the vibes and he was the fighter. He drew so much incoming just by being the center of attention. He, I think, really was elevated by the moment. And keep in mind, this is somebody who had one of the lower name IDs of this group. And I think he is certainly going to climb significantly in the polls. The other person I put as kind of like a runner-up winner was Nikki Haley, because I do think she has been almost invisible in terms of this presidential race since she announced. She announced, and then she dropped off the scene, and we really haven't heard much from her. I thought she handled herself very well in a number of these exchanges, including in feisty exchanges with Vivek on both Ukraine and also the exchange she had on abortion.
Yep.
I thought she handled herself well. I think she distinguished herself. I think that, there's a chance. It's not that she's going to skyrocket, but I think she's at 3% in the polls right now. I think she'll get a little bit of a bump because she outperformed what people expected and distinguished herself and was, clear and had, in my opinion, overall a good night.
I think you are definitely correct. I differ a little bit. I do think people should take a listen, though, to that Ukraine bit that we teased a little bit earlier, because it's important to this context. Let's take a listen.
Is there anyone on stage who would not support the increase of more funding to Ukraine?
We would not
support it.
Europe needs to step up. I would have Europe step up and do their job.
Ukraine is the first line of defense for us. And the problem that Vivek doesn't understand is he wants to hand Ukraine to Russia. He wants to let China eat Taiwan. He wants to go and stop funding Israel. You don't do that to friends. What you do instead is you have the backs of your friends. Ukraine is the front line of defense. Putin has said, once Russia takes Ukraine, Poland and the Baltics are next. That's a world war. We're trying to prevent war. Look at what Putin did today. He killed Prigozhin. When I was at the UN, the Russian ambassador suddenly died. This guy is a murderer, and you are choosing a murderer over a pro-American country.
Nikki, I wish you well in your future career on the boards of Lockheed and Raytheon.
I'm not on
but the fact of the matter,
and
Boeing came off of it, but you've been pushing this lie. You've been pushing this lie all week, Nikki.
You want to go and defund Israel? You want to
okay, let me address that. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to address each of those right now. This is the false lies of a professional politician. There you have it.
Your watch,
so the reality
make America less safe. You have no foreign policy experience, and it shows.
And you know what? The foreign policy experience that you all have.
Donors loving that Ukraine bit.
Listen, she got raucous applause for that. I thought that was the one exchange. We're putting the substance of it aside, where she's obviously spouting just neocon worldview, but she's spouting neocon worldview very effectively.
I hate to say it.
And the audience raucously applauded her. That was the only time where I really felt it was clear that someone got the better of Vivek in an exchange. Even though, in terms of where he has positioned himself, I think he has more of the GOP base on his side. But on the showmanship, she, really took it to him. She didn't back down, and I think it was that moment right there is the reason why I really think she did herself some favor.
So I was checking the Google search trends this morning. We were both going over it, and the data basically bears out what you said. Vivek Ramaswamy had the biggest search term bump of the night. He is the most unknown, funny name, etc. But Haley had the second biggest. We all have to look at it. It actually was equivalent to Vivek. She was the second biggest of the entire night. So I do think she's going to get a big donor pop off of this. And yeah, look, we shouldn't pretend that view isn't very predominant, at least some parts of the Republican Party, specifically the donors, I think a lot of whom were cheering. So listen, I think that she did well. My thing is that because this entire debate, in a sense, is a farce, without Trump, I only thought there really could be one winner. And that's why I went, and I'll put this up there on the screen, guys, my winner, I just said it was Vivek, because at the end of the day here, it's like choosing and parsing multiple. Everyone here is already fighting for number two. Like, you can't be the clear winner when the literal winner is off doing an X interview and is polling at 2/3 higher than every single other person on the stage. So I think it's fine to have a moment like Nikki Haley, but you know, I think she'll get a moderate polling bump. I think the Ukraine and the Bill Krystal people will freaking love her. But for the #2 slot, the fact is, Vivek was already nearly tied with Ramaswamy in the RCP polling average.
Vivek and DeSantis, you mean?
Vivek and DeSantis, I'm sorry. And for Vivek to then have a 40% non-name ID in the state of Iowa, he's going to get massive media attention out of this.
Yeah.
His name ID is going to go through the roof. I bet he's going to raise a ton of money. Then those stories about him rising to #2 is going to generate even more earned media. It's a cycle of which can only really benefit him.
Yeah.
I think up to the top.
And, you know, he did a lot for himself, but he also was really given an assist.
Yes.
By the fact that every candidate on stage was
Kept
basically
attacking
gunning for him. And,
right.
you know, it's funny because we expected that he was going to be able to handle himself well. And he did. And we also expected that since he has been willing to go on a bunch of different shows and mix it up with all kinds of different people who don't agree with him, that he would be well positioned to handle those sorts of attacks. And he was. What I didn't expect is that no one would basically even try to lay a glove on Ron DeSantis. They basically moved on from him, which is a real sign of weakness on his part as well. But it ended up being a really failed strategy. It would have been much better for the rest of the field if they had pretended like Vivek didn't really exist, because they gave him a lot of oxygen. They made him really central, and it was very elevating. Go ahead, Saagar.
I was going to say that was just so on display with Chris Christie.
Yes.
You know, in that moment where he tried to ridicule him for copying the. By the way, I did think it was a bit odd. The moment he said the line, I was like, "Isn't that what Obama said in the Audacity of Hope speech?"
Same reaction.
Was that Audacity of? I forget. The 2004 speech, the Red America, Black, whatever. There's
no red states and blue states.
2004 DNC. Let's call it that.
Yeah.
So Vivek kind of borrowed one of the lines from there and got called out by Chris Christie. Just take a listen here because it's very clear he very much got under his skin.
I've had enough already tonight of a guy who sounds like ChatGPT standing up here. And the last person in one of these debates, Brett, who stood in the middle of the stage and said, "What's a skinny guy with an odd last name doing up here?" was Barack Obama, and I'm afraid we're dealing with the same type of amateur standing on stage tonight.
Come over and give me a hug. Give me a hug just like you did to Obama.
The same type of amateur.
And you'll help elect me just like you did to Obama, too. Give me that
the
bear hug,
same
brother.
type of amateur.
Hold on.
I thought that was a good parry from Vivek, but also, as you could see, very clear. He drives him crazy. They were attacking him all night, and you put all of that together, and it's a victory in terms of attention. Notice Mike Pence may have spoken more the entire night. He didn't have the same level of moments. He was actually more trying to dominate the conversation and also attack the others that were on the stage. I think it just irked him that he's like, I'm the freaking former vice president, and I'm sitting here behind these two jokers. And he's like, I just can't believe it. It was very much, like you said, Amy Klobuchar energy towards Pete Buttigieg.
Absolutely.
Clearly drives him nuts.
Absolutely. The person who it was really clear just absolutely loathes Vivek was Mike Pence. I mean, it was just visceral from the first mention of him. It was really clear. And they had a bunch of exchanges back and forth. Chris Christie getting booed there. I think Chris Christie made a real sort of tactical error by saying, like, it's America, you're allowed to boo, because it sort of greenlit everybody to boo everything that he said from there on out. And he played the heel. He's not going to be the Republican nominee. I thought it was a decent line there, you know, in terms of his hit on Vivek. I also thought Vivek handled it fine, but it just gives you a sense of how much he was taking the incoming and ended up being the center of attention, which is kind of incredible. In terms of my losers, let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. You know, two of them are people that we haven't even really talked about, Doug Burgum, Asa Hutchinson. They just were kind of invisible.
Yeah,
their answers were kind of stumbling. They were awkward to watch, et cetera.
No big moments.
I mean, I don't even know if I should call them losers because they're already at like below 1%.
Right.
So are they really going to go down? Or they probably just stay where they are, to be honest with you. The other person that I put up here, though, you might be surprised, which is Ron DeSantis. And the reason why is not because I thought he had a terrible night. I thought he did fine. I thought some of his answers were kind of politician-y, especially on climate change and abortion and Ukraine. He would sort of try to find that, like, you know, how can I wordsmith this to not really say anything or not really take a hard position? I thought that was noticeable at certain points. But overall, I thought he did fine. The problem for him is he can't have all the oxygen sucked up by somebody else. And, you know, if I'm looking at this in terms of who's going to go up in the polls and who's going to go down in the polls, I think it's very likely that Ron DeSantis goes down in the polls, even in spite of the fact that he had a decent outing, simply because for people who are looking for a Trump alternative, many of them are going to go to Vivek or, you know, Nikki Haley. To the extent that you have other people on the stage who are proving themselves to be worthy second place contenders, that's a disaster for Ron DeSantis, who has to consolidate all of the potential non-Trump vote to have a prayer at this thing.
Yeah, so this is where I'm just not sure. And I'll put my losers guys up there, please, on the screen, just so we can show a little bit of a difference. So mine as well, I feel like Burgum and Asa Hutchinson are the obvious. My biggest loser was Christie. Relative to what I expected, I put him as one of my expected winners of the night. He was completely unable to land the shots that he needed to, both against Ramaswamy. Here was the craziest thing, and this is kind of to your point. He did not say one word against Ron DeSantis, a man who he has attacked on Disney, a man who he has attacked many times before. If you want to consolidate the anti-Trump vote, you need to be going after Ron DeSantis. He didn't land a single, he didn't even try a shot against him. True. Against Ramaswamy, Ramaswamy interrupted him a couple of times. He parried, you know, pretty well on the Obama line as well. He never allowed him to get Marco Rubio'd. Christie takes a while to get keyed up before he delivers his deadly line. So clearly the lesson is just interrupt him, you know, throughout the entire thing. Christie, man, the thing is, Christie, if you will notice and remember, he got the second question of the night where they directly gave him the opportunity to contrast with Ron DeSantis. They're like, why are you better than DeSantis? I believe that was the framing of the question from Brett Baer. He miffed it. Totally. Started talking about his old record in New Jersey. Dude, you've been gone for almost a decade.
There was way too much about the record and not even as governor as like, you know, when he was on the legal side of things. Like it was not a great night for Chris Christie. The reason I don't put him as a loser is because I don't think it's going to really change his polling.
Fair enough.
And so that's what I was thinking. But what do you think about Ron DeSantis? You think he's going to go up, down, stay the same?
I think you say flat, and that's a loss whenever you're going to see Ramaswamy have such a bump. In a certain way, like, I don't know. I didn't put him as a loser just because I thought it was such a wash. I want to see how it shakes out. Listen, I mean, some of the polling that we've seen, people ranked him like number 3. Again, he's like, he was there. I don't know if that's a loss. It's one of those where if you're not going to lose, then it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world.
For this guy, though, who after the midterms, just remember how hot he was, how, you know, the future was the headline, and he was up there right neck and neck with Trump. And now to go to the first debate where Trump's not even there, number one, and number two, you're not the center. Like, you're not the guy that people are trying to take shots at, which, you know, on the one hand, it's safer for you. It allowed him to just go out and do the things that he had planned and roll out the, you know, whatever talking points he had prepared, which is not a knock on him. They all had talking points prepared, but he's able to sort of do that seamlessly. On the other hand, you can see with Vivek what an opportunity it is when all of the fire is trained at you, because, you know, that's like risk reward. And so the fact that DeSantis didn't have that opportunity to be the center of attention, to take those attacks, to prove he's a fighter, et cetera, I mean, it just makes him look small. And like I said to begin with, the fact that you have other contenders who are getting the attention, who are getting noticed, or getting the Google search traffic interest, et cetera, you can't have that if you are DeSantis and you actually want to be the top Trump alternative. So that's why I put it as a loss for him. And I would expect him to go down a bit in the polls. Again, not because he had like a terrible night, just because of the nature of the dynamics of where he is and who really outperformed him. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.